Welcome back to 3R Ballistics, and today we're going to be testing some homemade ballistics gel against some 9mm Hornady critical duty. This is a 134 grain plus P and the D.I.Y do-it-all slug into the homemade ballistics gel. Now, there are two basic types of ballistic gel. There's the organic gel, which the FBI uses, 10%, which is made of gelatin and water. Mix that up, certain ratios, and you get kind of an off yellowish clear color, typically. And then you have the new stuff, the synthetic, that has no organic compound to it. And one of the big features of that is that it doesn't mold. It's a little bit more heat stable, so you can use it at higher temperatures, but it does not have the same consistency as the organic gel. Now, when you're comparing tissue damage and terminal ballistics, is it that important? I don't know. That's part of what this test is. We have organic gel. We have a homemade clear ballistics gel where we just use some styrene powder and a plasticizer, for lack of a better word, and made a very clear ballistic gel. We have a elastomer gel, which is more of a glue, so it's got a haze to it, not as clear. But I'm curious, is that going to stop the projectile sooner than these other two? And then one of my favorites, once I started learning how to, I won't get too much into the science of the styrene blocking and cooling and so on, but I came up with something that I really like. In this test, it's a little bit more red, and it's meant to have color because I think it'll show tissue damage a little bit better, but I did go too far. There is a lot of material that's in there because these were melted down and reformed to make sure that they could be melted down at a reasonable temperature, but they are by far the most heat stable. Well, when we went out to go do the testing, we decided to go on a day where it was, close to 90 degrees. I used a black table on purpose so that I could get temperatures elevated. And speaking of the testing, and as we went out to the range, for some reason I forgot to hit the record button or the on button for the microphone. So I have no sound. I will have to voice over a lot of what we're about to see. But it's exciting. We got some good samples and some failures. I mean, that's how you learn. The elastomer block didn't do so good, but it's definitely something that I'm very interested in moving forward. I'll even give you the price breakdown. Is it really worth making a clear ballistic synthetic block versus buying it? Yes, I was able to do it for about half the price, and if I were to buy in bulk, I could even cut that down even more and make them for a quarter of the price of what you can typically buy them. But, we'll go through it as I go into the range time. And like I said, every one of these is getting hit with the critical duty 9mm so that we have a very stable variable to see how much penetration we're getting. The reason I use this is these have been shown to go about 14 to 16 inches consistently in the organic FBI 10% ballistics gel. And then the D.I.Y do-it-all slug was just for fun. We like I don't know if you remember, but I'll put a link in the description. This D.I.Y slug has a little cavity. You can put a Phillips head screwdriver or other components, which we used here, to create a bright flash. And with that being said, let's get out to the range and let's have some fun. So here I'm basically explaining that we're going to start with the organic ballistics gel, which we had to keep in a cooler in the truck on ice because it was already reaching in the mid 80s. Here I explained that we're going to be using a Canic 4.5 inch, I believe, barrel length. We should be hitting 1150 feet per second, but we got the chronograph, so we'll also be checking that. And since it's hot, we don't want that organic ballistics gel to melt. We're going to shoot it with the 9mm and go straight in to the 12 gauge slug. So let's get to the testing. And as you can see on the first block, the organic gel, this Hornady Critical Duty did exactly what is supposed to and did it perfectly. We had a total penetration of right around 15 inches. I believe it was 15.5 inches. We had a good wound cavity up front, great expansion. It was a little bright. I will admit that it was bright, but you could see we had about 15.5 inches. So let's move on to the 12 gauge slug. Now I do want to mention that we did put a 20 gauge sheet metal piece of steel in front of the ballistics block to hopefully create a little bit more terminal ballistics and kinetic energy up front. And as you can see, I really believe it worked. Now, the reason we're doing this is we want to see the elongation and stretch that we can get out of each material, just pushing it to its limit before it tears and rips. And here you can see the damage created by both the 9mm and the 12 gauge slug. This is the piece of sheet metal where it went in. Quite a nasty hole on the inside, and as we flip it around here, you can see the exit wound before it hits the ballistics block. Now let's move on to the clear ballistic block, as we will hit it again with the 9mm, and once again we got 1164 feet per second, pretty much as advertised. Now this is where things get interesting. This is a 16-inch block. Theoretically, it should stop before the end. And as we see, oh, it stretches, pulls the bullet back. And if we wouldn't have slow-mo, we wouldn't have known. It got bounced right back out. I observed that the wound cavity wasn't quite as massive, and the bullet, which is at the end of the table there, did not open up quite as much. Now at the end I will show all 4 bullets and show the expansion. I'll probably go ahead and show weights and retention, but you'll notice this just did not push back into the bullet quite as far. So let's try the 12 gauge and see what we get with this. Good placement right below the 9mm. Good flash from our do-it-all slug. And now as we slow it down, the kinetic energy is still all up front, but we get a completely different result from the elongation and expansion from this gel block. This synthetic gel block seemed to contain the kinetic energy quite a bit more. And not only does it contain that energy quite well, the block also spits out the do-it-all slug from its gut. Now, as we bring it in and take a look at the clear block, there is one thing I really do like about the clear block. Anytime you have any soot or heavy contrasting powder burn, you are able to see the wound channel quite nicely from the clearness of the ballistics block. It's hard to see the 9mm, but here you can definitely see once again the sheet metal is damaged basically the same as the one before. Okay, next up we have glue. Let's see how glue affects this. Ready? Yeah, okay, here we go. Woo! Now, contrary to my belief and the stickiness of glue, the elastomer did not hold the bullet back. We had a pass-through with quite a bit of velocity of the bullet coming out of the back. So we moved on to the 12 gauge. And I have to say, while it did contain the kinetic energy quite well and stay together, it still wasn't quite what we wanted. It had great elongation, it hardly tore, but we also noticed that this was by far the least heat stable. This was more susceptible to the heat than even the organic gel block. Granted, we did not keep this in ice, but it was melting by the end of the testing. Now on to my favorites. Like I said, these are a little bit more reddish in color, but these can be out in 200-degree temperatures and keep their shape. They have great elongation, they contain the bullet well, and I was able to thicken these up, so the same bullet, same construction, same speed that I have been getting all day, I was able to stop in about 9 inches of space. We got the same, if not a little bit more expansion as we did before from the projectile. Now moving on to the 12 gauge, this one's interesting. I need to explain that this 12 gauge shell is 250 grain traveling at 2,000 feet per second, and we're about 1 inch from the top, and we did get a tear, but it contained well. And as you can see, these things can bounce, they have great flexibility, and in the slow motion you can see how much elongation it has before we get any tearing. So because of this slow motion video, we had one more of these do-it-all slugs, and I figured I want to go ahead and do one of these without the sheet metal and get more of a center hit and see exactly how it reacts to the kinetic energy of a 250 grain slug going 2,000 feet per second. Okay, so for all those that are still here at the end, and in conclusion, you're probably waiting to hear how much it cost and what I used. I'll give you a rough breakdown. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step because there is still some development that I believe needs to be done. And I need to check on patents because the clear block that I made was very similar to the clear block that I have purchased before commercially. So I don't want to infringe on anything out there. So, but basically for the organic ballistics gel, I used clear gelatin like you would. I used, I believe, 28 ounces to get about I used 30 ounces to get 20 pounds of ballistics gel to make the 16-inch ballistic gel block. But just like anything else, you put the ballistic gel in cool water, you let it bloom, you double boil it so that you get a clear consistency. You can add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide to keep it from molding or extend the use, maybe even clear it up just a little bit. And you know, just like gelatin, then you let it cool, you kind of keep it in a cooler environment, and it works, and you can remelt it. I have remelted them plenty of times. I still like organic ballistic gel. It's simple. That whole process only cost me anywhere from $40 to $45 to make. I just don't like the elongation and how easy it is to tear, especially when you put something like tile or inorganic materials inside to check terminal ballistics. That's where I started looking at these synthetic ballistics. Now for the clear synthetic ballistic block, again, I'm going to be a little vague. I use styrene powder and white mineral oil, and it's a pretty simple mixture, but it's very hard to source. The white mineral oil, it can be expensive. If you buy it 1 gallon at a time, it can be expensive. Luckily, I was able to buy a bulk, but not a bunch. It was basically a 5-gallon bulk purchase of white mineral oil. That brought that cost down. And then the and then the styrene powder, that was hard to source. That took about 3 months to source and at a price that was reasonable. So you put both those together, it ended up costing me about $60, $65 to make the clear ballistics block. And it held up pretty well. It was probably a little too thin. If I remake it, I may add a little bit more powder or change the consistency. But that is where we move on. I then did the TPE, which is thermoplastic elastomer. And that's another thing. All these synthetic blocks need to be thermoplastic. You need to be able to remelt them and reuse them. And so I used TPE, which is an elastomer, and I thought, oh, the glue is going to be sticky. It's going to hold the bullet from going, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to reduce the amount of space you need for these ballistic blocks to capture projectiles and still have the terminal ballistics that we hope for. But the elastomer block was a fail. The bullet passed straight through. While it did contain quite a bit of the kinetic energy of the shotgun slug, it melted at about 85 degrees outside and about at 115 degrees on the table. It was just melting. So I'm scrapping that one. I'll tell you, I used TPE pellets and white mineral oil, 350 degrees for 2 hours, mixed it, but did not like that. Now, moving on to the next one. That one I'm going to keep a little bit more of a secret. That one I liked, and I'm going to be experimenting more with that. I will let you know that I did not use white mineral oil, and I didn't use styrene powder. That's about as much as I want to give on that one. We will continue on with that one, and maybe in the future I'll give a step-by-step, but definitely look at us using that ballistic block more in the future. I know I had a bunch of contaminants in this one. As I was remelting it, I did not clean the mold very well, and that's what happened with that. But as you can see in the video, it still shows quite nicely. It's my favorite. It reduces the projectile. Terminal ballistics are great. Elongation is great. And we're probably going to be sticking more with that one in the future. And the heat. We did that one at the table reached about 150 degrees. And we had nothing. I have not put any cooling on that. I have done nothing with that one. And it holds true to its shape in great heat. So that one just sits outside, no problems whatsoever. So I hope this was a lot of talking, and I appreciate all those that have stayed till the end. Leave a comment in the description. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want me to use in the future and what you might want to see these ballistics blocks getting hit with. But until the next one,